The signal came through weak and broken, crackling across millions of miles of empty space. Ambassador Kalutin's voice shook with fear as he spoke into the emergency transmitter, knowing this might be his people's last hope. "Please, anyone who can hear this message," he whispered, his three-fingered hands trembling. "We are the Zalani Confederation. Our worlds are dying." For 3 months now, the Vorthok swarm had been eating their way through Zalani space like hungry locusts. These weren't ordinary raiders looking for treasure or slaves. The Vorthok were something far worse, living machines made of silicon and metal who consumed entire planets for fuel. They stripped away atmosphere, devoured oceans, and left behind nothing but dead rock floating in space. The Zalani were plant-eaters, peaceful farmers who had never hurt anyone. Their ships were designed for carrying grain and vegetables between worlds, not for fighting wars. When the Vorthok came, the Zalani barely managed to run away, watching helplessly as their beautiful green worlds turned gray and lifeless. "We have heard stories," Kalutin continued, his voice getting stronger. "Stories about the Deathworlders from Sal-3. They say you humans are warriors born from a world so dangerous it should have killed you. They say you fight like demons when cornered." On Luna Station, high above Earth's surface, Commander Jin sat in the communications center, drinking his morning coffee. He was young for a military commander, only 32, but his eyes held the sharp focus of someone who had seen real combat. The emergency signal made his coffee cup stop halfway to his lips. Jin turned to his communications officer. "Play that again, Corporal Lee." As the message repeated, Jin studied the tactical display, showing Vorthok movement patterns. Red dots spread like poison across the star map, each one representing a dead world. The aliens were moving in a straight line toward more populated systems, growing stronger with every planet they consumed. 12 billion civilians, Jin muttered, setting down his cup. "And they're asking us for help with evacuation ships." He almost smiled. The Zalani had no idea what they were about to get. When humans heard that someone was bullying peaceful farmers, evacuation was never the first option that came to mind. Jin reached for his secure communicator. "Get me Admiral, you immediately. Tell her we have a pest control problem that needs the full treatment." The Zalani wanted help. They were about to discover that when humans offered help, it came with overwhelming firepower attached. "Admiral," you walked into the orbital command center with the kind of calm that made her subordinates nervous. At 55, she had gray streaks in her black hair and scars on her hands from her days as a fighter pilot. When she moved fast, it usually meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Gentlemen, we have a situation," she announced to the Seoul Defense Council. The holographic display showed the Vorthok expansion in real time, red death spreading across peaceful star systems like spilled blood. General Park leaned forward in his chair. "Admiral, the Zalani are asking for evacuation ships. Maybe 50 vessels to help move civilians." Yu's expression didn't change. "How long since we've had a real field test of the new combat doctrine?" 8 months, ma'am," replied Colonel Kim. "Since the pirates near Proxima." "And those were just raiders with stolen cargo haulers," you said, tapping her fingers on the metal table. "The Vorthok are different. They're systematic, organized. They're exactly what we've been preparing for." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what she was thinking. For years, human military strategists had been developing new ways to fight in space. New ships, new weapons, new tactics that had never been tested against a real enemy. The Vorthok swarm represented the perfect opportunity. "The Zalani want evacuation support," you continued. "I'm authorizing Operation Shepherd's Shield, but we're not running away from this fight." The debate was swift and decisive. In exactly 11 minutes, every council member had voted yes. When humans heard that someone was eating peaceful farmers alive, the response was always the same, complete, in overwhelming force. Lieutenant Bo immediately began pulling up fleet rosters on his tablet. The 5th Expeditionary Fleet was humanity's newest and most powerful combat group. These weren't the old ships that had fought space pirates. These were vessels built specifically to survive in the most dangerous environments the universe could throw at them. Meanwhile, Captain Han was already on the phone with the terraforming corps. "I need construction ships, agricultural specialists, and full ecosystem rebuilding capability," she told them. "We're not just stopping the Vorsuck, we're fixing everything they broke." What the Zalani didn't realize was that humans had been watching the Vorthok for months. Earth's deep space monitoring stations had been tracking every movement, studying their patterns, learning their weaknesses. The aliens thought they were asking for help from strangers. In reality, they were asking humanity to finally spring the trap they'd been preparing. The docks around Earth buzzed with activity that hadn't been seen since the last major military exercise. Ships that had been scattered across the solar system for routine patrols were now streaming back to Luna Station, and Mars orbital like metal fish swimming upstream. Commander Wu stood on the observation deck of the main assembly station, watching the 5th Expeditionary Fleet take shape. The Zalani had asked for maybe 30 ships to help evacuate their people. What they were getting was something completely different. Final count, Major Su. Wu asked his logistics officer. Su checked her tablet, scrolling through pages of vessel classifications. 1,247 ships, sir. That includes 12 heavy dreadnoughts, 36 carrier battle groups, and over 400 support vessels. Wu nodded like this was perfectly normal. To humans, it was. When someone asked for help, you didn't send just enough. You sent everything you could spare, and then some. "What about the special ships?" he asked. "All loaded and ready," Su replied. "The agricultural specialists are particularly impressive this time. We've got 17 full terraforming vessels that can rebuild an entire planet's ecosystem from scratch. Each one carries enough genetic material and construction nanites to turn a dead rock into a garden world in about 6 weeks. Through the massive windows, they could see the terraforming ships' huge, bulky vessels that looked more like flying cities than warships. But looks were deceiving. These ships were built to work in the most dangerous places in space, near black holes where gravity could crush normal matter, close to dying stars where radiation would cook most aliens alive, in the freezing void between galaxies, where temperatures approached absolute zero. Every human ship shared this capability, while other species built vessels that needed perfect conditions to operate. Humans built theirs, assuming everything would go wrong. Their warships had armor thick enough to survive stellar flares, and engines powerful enough to escape the gravity wells of neutron stars. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Cho from the communications station, "the Zalani are asking about our estimated arrival time. They seem ... concerned about our fleet size." Wu almost laughed. The supply train alone, just the cargo ships carrying food, fuel, and spare parts, outweighed the entire Zalani Navy. And that wasn't even counting the actual warships. "Tell them not to worry," Wu said. "We're bringing exactly what they need. They asked for help with a pest problem. We're bringing pest control." He turned back to watch the fleet assembly, knowing the Zalani had no idea what was coming their way. The space around Kepler-7 had been quiet for weeks, with only a few scattered Zalani refugee ships hiding behind the system's outer planets. Then reality itself seemed to tear open as 1,200 human vessels dropped out of hyperspace all at once. The energy release was so massive that every sensor array in 4 neighboring star systems went completely white for 37 seconds. Emergency systems across the sector started screaming warnings about possible solar flares or supernovas. But this wasn't a dying star. This was humanity arriving to work. Ambassador Kalutin was sipping his morning nutrient broth on the bridge of the Zalani flagship Gentle Harvest when his tactical officer started making strange choking sounds. The young officer's fur was standing straight up, and his large eyes were fixed on the sensor display, like he'd seen a ghost. "Ambassador," the officer whispered, "I think our sensors are broken." Kalutin set down his drink and walked over to look. What he saw made his 3 hearts skip several beats. The display showed over 1,000 contacts, each one radiating more power than anything in their database. But that couldn't be right. The humans had said they were sending help, not an invasion force. "Run a full diagnostic," he ordered, his voice shaking slightly. "Already did, sir. 3 times. The readings are accurate." Kalutin stared at the numbers. Each human escort frigate, their smallest combat vessels, carried more weapons than the Gentle Harvest, which was supposed to be the most advanced ship the Zilani had ever built. The larger human ships didn't even register properly on their sensors. The computers kept displaying error messages, because the power readings were beyond their measurement capabilities. Then Admiral Yu's voice came across the communications channel, calm and professional as if she was discussing the weather. "Vessels, this is Admiral Yu of the United Earth Fleet. Please transmit coordinates of all Vorthok-infested systems. We'll begin pest control operations immediately." "Pest control," Kalutin repeated weakly. His communications officer looked just as confused. "Sir, should I tell them we only asked for evacuation ships?" Kalutin watched the human fleet spreading out in perfect formation, their massive dreadnoughts moving like predators getting ready to hunt. Each ship was built like a fortress that could survive flying through a star, and they moved with the precision of creatures born for war. "No," he said quietly, "I don't think that matters anymore. The humans hadn't come to evacuate anyone. They'd come to solve the Vorthok problem permanently." As the massive human fleet moved toward Vorthok space, Ambassador Kalutin found himself stationed aboard the human command ship Iron Will as an observer. He had expected to feel out of place, but nothing had prepared him for what he was seeing. The bridge was a controlled chaos of activity. Human officers moved with sharp efficiency, calling out reports and coordinates in calm voices. What shocked Kalutin most was how relaxed they seemed. These people were heading into combat against an enemy that had destroyed dozens of worlds, and they acted like they were going to a routine training exercise. "Colonel Wan," Kalutin asked nervously, "your ships seem to move very fast, are they? Considered advanced by human standards?" Colonel Wan looked up from his tactical display and shrugged. No, these are just standard fleet vessels. We call them acceptable for long-range operations. The really fast ships stayed back at Earth for defense duties." Kalutin's translator had to run that twice. Ships that could outrun anything the Zilani had ever built were considered merely acceptable by humans. "What about firepower?" he pressed, hoping for better news. One gestured casually at a formation of sleek vessels moving alongside the larger ships. "Those light destroyers. Each one carries enough concentrated firepower to turn a continent into glass. Pretty standard armament for escort duty." The Zilani ambassador felt his knees go weak. Those light destroyers were smaller than his own flagship, but they could apparently destroy entire landmasses, and the humans had hundreds of them, treating them like they were barely worth mentioning. As he watched, a group of human fighters launched from one of the carriers. They moved through space like living things, twisting and turning in ways that defied everything Kalutin knew about physics. Their acceleration rates should have turned their pilots into paste, but somehow, the humans inside were not only surviving but performing complex maneuvers that looked more like dancing than flying. "How do your pilots survive those forces?" Kalutin asked. "Gravity compensation and genetic adaptation," one replied matter-of-factly. "All our combat personnel are bred and trained for high-stress environments. It's what happens when you evolve on a death world." That phrase again, death world. Kalutin was beginning to understand. It wasn't just about Earth's dangerous environment. It was about what that environment had created. A species that considered surviving near black holes routine, training. People who built their weakest ships stronger than most civilizations. Greatest weapons. The humans weren't just helping the Zilani. They were about to show the Vorthok what real predators looked like. The Vorthok swarm had been moving through space for 3 months, consuming everything in their path like a plague of metal locusts. They had destroyed 17 peaceful worlds, and were heading toward the Zilani core systems when they encountered something they had never faced. Before humans who were actually looking for a fight, Captain Tay stood on the bridge of his heavy cruiser Stormbreaker, watching the enemy formation approach on his tactical display. The Vorthok fleet looked impressive, over 800 vessels of various sizes, all bristling with weapons and armor plating made from consumed planets. "Sir," reported his weapons officer, Lieutenant Nam, "enemy ships are moving into standard swarm formation. They're trying to surround us." Tay nodded calmly. "Let them. It'll make targeting easier." The Vorthok had used this tactic successfully against every species they'd encountered. Spread out in a massive cloud, overwhelm the enemy with sheer numbers, then close in for the kill. It had worked perfectly against peaceful agricultural worlds, whose ships were designed for hauling cargo, not fighting wars. But humans weren't farmers. They were predators who had spent their entire history fighting each other and everything else their deadly planet could throw at them. "All ships, prepare kinetic bombardment," Tay ordered. "Target their largest vessels first." The human ships opened fire with weapons the Vorthok had never imagined. Kinetic rounds, simple chunks of metal, accelerated to 30% the speed of light. When they hit, they didn't just destroy ships. They turned them into expanding clouds of superheated plasma that glowed like tiny stars. The first Vorthok hive ship simply vanished in a brilliant flash, then the second, then the third. The alien formation, which had seemed so intimidating moments before, began falling apart as ship after ship was reduced to glowing gas. "Enemy return fire is ineffective," reported Lieutenant Nam. "Their weapons can't penetrate our armor at this range." The Vorthok had built their ships to fight creatures like themselves, slow, methodical, relying on overwhelming numbers. They had never faced an enemy that could strike from impossible distances with weapons that moved at near light speed. 4 hours and 17 minutes after it began, the battle was over. Captain Tay's battle group had eliminated all 847 enemy vessels without taking a single casualty. A few human ships had scorch marks on their armor, but nothing more serious than that. The supposedly unstoppable Vorthok advance stopped dead in a single afternoon. For the first time in their existence, the swarm had met something more dangerous than they were. Ambassador Kalutin thought the war was over after Captain Tay's devastating victory. The main Vorthok fleet had been destroyed, their advance stopped. Surely now the humans would help evacuate the remaining Zilani civilians and go home. He couldn't have been more wrong. "Admiral Yu," Kalutin said carefully, "the immediate threat has been eliminated. Perhaps we should focus on rescue operations." Admiral Yu looked at him with the same expression a teacher might give a confused student. "Ambassador, we've only dealt with their forward assault force. The real work starts now." She pulled up a holographic star map showing the local sector. Red dots marked every system the Vorthok had touched over the past year. There were dozens of them, scattered across 63 different star systems. "In human military doctrine," Yu explained patiently, "partial solutions to existential threats are considered mission failures. The Vorthok aren't just raiders, they're a plague. You don't cure a plague by treating the symptoms. You eliminate every trace of the disease." Commander Do stepped forward, his face showing the kind of grim determination that made even other humans nervous. "My hunter-killer squadrons are already moving to secondary targets. We've identified Vorthok breeding facilities, supply depots, and construction yards in 47 systems." Kalutin felt his stomach drop. "You're going to hunt down every single one of them." "Every single one," Du confirmed. "We've been tracking their movements since this started. We know where they come from, where they hide, where they reproduce. By the time we're finished, there won't be a single Vorthok left alive in this galaxy." The Zilani ambassador watched in growing amazement as human task forces split off from the main fleet, each one heading toward a different system. These weren't random attacks. They were surgical strikes, based on months of intelligence gathering and analysis. What had started as a simple rescue mission was becoming the systematic extermination of an entire species, and the humans approached it with the same calm efficiency they brought to everything else. "How long will this take?" Kalutin asked weakly. 2 months, you replied, checking her tablet. "Maybe less, if we don't run into any unexpected resistance." She said it like she was discussing a minor home repair project, not the complete elimination of a threat that had terrorized this part of space for years. The Zilani had asked for help. They were getting the most thorough pest control operation in galactic history, while the hunter-killer squadrons were busy erasing every trace of the Vorthok from existence. A different kind of miracle was happening on the worlds they had left behind. Engineer Me stood in the control center of the terraforming vessel, New Dawn, watching through massive windows as dead Kepler 7b slowly came back to life. Day 26 of restoration, Me reported into her log. Atmospheric composition now at 67% optimal. We should have full breathable atmosphere by tomorrow. Ambassador Kalutin floated beside her in a protective environment suit, his large eyes wide with disbelief. 3 weeks ago, this planet had been nothing but bare rock and poisoned air. The Vorthok had stripped away everything, the oceans, the soil, even most of the atmosphere. It should have taken centuries to rebuild what they had destroyed. Instead, the humans were doing it in less than a month. "How is this possible?" Kalutin whispered, watching as green patches spread across the planet's surface like paint being poured onto a canvas. Me smiled and gestured toward the massive machines working on the surface below. "Construction nanites," she explained. "Microscopic robots that can build anything. We program them to build. We seed them with basic materials and genetic templates. Then they multiply and construct entire ecosystems from the ground up." Giant atmospheric processors were pumping out breathable air, while soil generators created billions of tons of fertile dirt from raw rock. Lakes and rivers appeared as the nanites released stored water and began carving proper drainage patterns. And everywhere, hardy earth plants began taking root, their genetics modified to thrive in the local conditions. "We brought seeds and genetic samples from over 2 million different species," Me continued. "Everything from basic bacteria to full forest ecosystems. The nanites place each organism exactly where it needs to be for optimal growth." What amazed Kalutin most was the speed. Where Zilani terraforming took generations of careful cultivation, humans simply commanded their machines to rebuild entire worlds and watched it happen in real time. They weren't just restoring what had been lost, they were making it better. "The soil will be more fertile than the original," Me explained. "The water will be cleaner. The air will be purer. When your people come back to resettle, they'll find their worlds improved beyond their original condition." Kalutin watched a forest spring up in minutes, where hours before there had been only bare stone. The humans didn't just destroy threats, they created miracles. 2 months later, the last Vorthok breeding facility was reduced to glowing debris in a distant system. The threat that had terrorized the sector for years was completely gone, wiped out so thoroughly that future archaeologists would struggle to prove they had ever existed. Ambassador Kalutin stood in the main conference room aboard the Zilani flagship, surrounded by the leaders of 12 different worlds. They had gathered to offer humanity something unprecedented, full membership in the Zilani Confederation, with all the rights and privileges that came with it. Admiral Kalutin began formally, on behalf of the Zilani Confederation, "We would be honored to welcome humanity as our newest member species. You have saved not just our worlds, but our entire civilization." Admiral, you listened politely, her hands folded behind her back. When he finished, she smiled the same calm smile she'd worn throughout the entire campaign. "Ambassador, we're grateful for the offer," she replied. "But humans prefer bilateral defense agreements with individual species, rather than joining larger confederations. We find it keeps things simpler when situations like this arise." The Zilani leaders exchanged confused glances. They were offering humanity a place among the most advanced civilizations in the sector, and the humans were politely turning them down like it was a dinner invitation they couldn't make. "However," Yu continued, "we will be leaving some infrastructure behind for ongoing security purposes." Lieutenant Kong stepped forward with a datapad. 17 monitoring stations positioned throughout your space, plus a small garrison of about 50 ships for routine patrols. Kalutin nearly choked. 50 human ships was what they considered a small garrison. Each one could probably handle the entire Zilani Navy by itself. "The monitoring stations will keep watch for any future threats," Yu explained. "If something like the Vorthok shows up again, we'll know about it immediately." As the massive human fleet prepared to return to Earth, the Zilani finally understood what had happened. They hadn't just been rescued, they had gained neighbors. Neighbors who considered eliminating galaxy-spanning threats a routine maintenance task. The final transmission from Admiral Yu was brief and matter-of-fact. "Call if you need anything else." As the human ships disappeared into hyperspace, Kalutin realized they now lived next door to a species that treated interstellar warfare like pest control. It was both the most comforting and terrifying thought he'd ever had.